All righty, there we go. We are live, and I am on my third episode of the new Rays of Our Lives debate and discussion series. And this is my brother Ken, by the way, which I'll introduce here more in a moment. And he was actually on one of my PDocs live stream series, which usually are dedicated to business, but that was kind of a fuck all one where we just had fun and it was really cool. So I'll probably link the description of that if you guys want to check it out, anybody watching this. As well as I'm going to preface today's topic for anybody that already knew, and that's why they kind of searched this video out or asked me for the link. Penny and I are going to dive into our thoughts and talk about UFOs, or today they're known as UAPs, and we'll even talk about the acronyms. I think there's a lot we can get into and discuss, and kind of see where it goes from there. My whole goal with these type of discussions is just have free-flowing organic conversations. And a lot to do with this topic. I'm all for disclosure, transparency, hearing multiple perspectives on things. And this is a topic that I think fascinates a majority of humanity, never mind just US citizens, but I think certainly it's international. Awesome. We got a dog appearance. Mine is on the bed in the corner hiding from the camera, but she'll probably make an appearance as well. So yeah, guys, that's what we're going to kind of dive into and talk about today. Kenny, you want to just kick it off, giving a little intro, say hi to anybody that may be watching?
Hi, I don't know who's watching because I've only watched one or two of these, but hello to everyone who's watching. How's that, everyone?
That's very inclusive. That's what I like.
All
That's
right.
what I like. Speaking of inclusive, and some of you guys might see a post next week because I'm going to be doing more of these series. Another thing, in addition to like these fascinating topics, I'm going to be booking people, hopefully people of an opposing view for some of these topics, but more controversial things that are relevant now. We'll probably do abortion. We'll probably do DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. We'll probably do immigration, illegal immigration, and topics that people are pretty. Kenny, I don't think you and I see too much differently on most of those, and that's what we're going to talk. That's not what we're going to discuss today, but
probably.
Yeah, but those are more fun to debate with people that are on the other side of the aisle, that have the total opposite perspective, and I like those discussions because I think right now a lot of people are getting their information from just kind of one source or one side, or we all know anything mainstream news now has some semblance of bias or implicit objective that isn't just transparent and objective journalism anymore. So I think these little independent sources and people doing their own research and sharing what they find and hearing multiple sides, you're going to start to see that one makes a lot more sense than the other, even though you might have only heard one side for quite a while,
Yeah, absolutely.
Any thoughts on what I just said, really basic, before I dive into the topic today?
Well, I think if we're going to call this a debate, we might have chosen a more topic that we are disagree upon, but this might just be a conversation. That's
why it's the debate and discussion series. I don't expect.
Okay, yeah, I didn't notice that. All right.
Yeah, and this isn't a topic that's really up for debate. I mean, if anybody really, well, let's start with that. Do you think there's people that still believe UFOs are not real?
Well, there's still people who believe, God, and they go to church and do all that. So there has to be people who believe UFOs aren't real.
I would agree. There's always some, right? But if you had to guess, what would you think that percentage is?
Getting lower every day.
That's the right answer. That's the right answer.
Yeah, I don't know what it is, but it's getting lower every day.
I think, part of the terminology, and we'll talk a little about that, from one of the biggest names and what's moved this conversation forward, I think both in internal government and internal, agencies, as well as to the general public and people like you and I that like to consume new information and find out. I think Lou Elizondo has been one of the most integral people in moving this conversation forward in the last handful of years. Are you familiar with him?
A little bit, yep.
I'll dive in a little more. But why I say that is he actually ran the government program. I don't know why I'm drawing ATIP. ATIP was the agency in the name of the government agency, but he also had a very just regular dude background. He's tatted up. He has a background in engineering. Everything has to make sense. He's a real rational type of guy. And what was cool when he went into that, as he talks about, he had no preconceived bias. He never really even thought about it. He's like, yeah, I mean, I have no care in the world, like one way or the other. I have no bias, no. He was more, I guess, a little bit of a skeptic, but definitely didn't think it was out of the realm of possibility whatsoever.
Right.
And really quickly, when he kind of, it's interesting hearing him talk about it because he kind of got kind of the bread trail crumbs into, like, he didn't quite know what he was getting into until one day he sat with this real high official guy and he's like, this is what you're going to be doing. You can't tell anybody. He's like, oh shit, this is some secret shit, right?
Yeah.
Because he
Yeah.
said everything is also so compartmentalized within government agencies that they're not sharing much information, or if you're outside of a specific wing or agency, you can't get information in other areas.
Well, the thing with that, one of the big things with that too, is now everything, none of them are government projects anymore. They're all privatized. They're black ops projects. And, so the government doesn't actually report on these. We can't, if it's not directly paid for with taxpayer money, we can't like look up the patents, get the records, get the whatever, the employee list, all that stuff anymore. Since I think it was late 60s, early 70s when this change started, maybe even back to the mid 60s or something. But over that 10-year course there, 65 to 75 or something, that all went from publicly funded companies doing this research to privately funded companies doing this research, and we lost ability as the public to freedom of interest, FOIA request, anything. You know what I mean? And
So you're
then
saying
now,
oh, sorry, carry on.
and they also have the right now to refuse. Say if these things were happening on a military base or a publicly accessible place type of deal, not military maybe, but a publicly accessible government funded place, it would be, First Amendment available to, media, the press, all the reporters, and now that's taken away from that. So, I mean, to get information on it has gotten just extremely more difficult since then. And then their whole disinformation campaign is a whole nother story. You know what I mean?
Yeah, we're going to dive into that a little. But are you saying to me, you're saying since this time period in the 70s approximately, when it's more black ops and privatized, you're saying there's no public and taxpayer funding going to any of these programs?
Not officially. No, I'm sure it is, but not officially and publicly. No.
That's what I wanted to clarify.
Yeah. No, I'm sure it is. It's still funded very similar, but I don't know. I don't know exactly the loopholes they use either, of course, but it's not, you can't trace the money to this anymore and say this is publicly funded, so we have, we should be privy to this information,
That's part of what this guy Lou has been able to do and kind of show now that he's been on the inside and kind of can see where some of the funding, because he's on the shots on where the money's getting spent. So that's an interesting part. But where I led off before I kind of went down that little rabbit hole, which is good to talk about, is the whole change in the nomenclature and the way we speak about it and the way people search for it now. So Lou was saying, in his perspective, he's seeing a big shift in more people being open to it since you've even just changed the name, just because there was so much preconceived misconceptions about UFOs and tinfoil hats and conspiracies. So now that you've even changed the verbiage, people are just more open to like, oh, okay. And he's like, it's interesting because he's like, it was really the worst kept secret ever by the government. Like, they actually didn't try to hide this from the public. They just tried to make people feel like they were crazy for talking about it. And they did a great job. For so many years, people felt so taboo and so almost paranormal, when I wouldn't even consider this necessarily paranormal. I guess it all depends on the definition and how you look at that. But either way, it's just fascinating how like just changing the overall acronym on how you speak about it is letting people talk about it more.
That is, I think that's more of a sociology or a psychology question than anything else. But yeah, it's definitely interesting. And I don't know, it just goes to show. I think a little bit of the older generation was stuck that UFOs were, hoo-ha, hokey pokey, woo-wah stuff. And then once we called it a UAP, they decided, oh, maybe that's real.
Yep.
Like, I don't know exactly. And also, I mean, just given with the technology stuff now and the way information spread, people are a little more quick to be open to more stuff in general.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
I would agree with that. And so UFO is obviously unidentified flying object. Then it changed to UAP. I want to say in the late 20s.
Unidentified aerial phenomenon.
And then it's made one more change since then. Are you familiar with this?
Which one was it?
It's another UAP, but they've now switched it. And why did they go away from the word aerial? Because they're getting sightings of these under the water now.
So you're right. No, I have.
The newest one is. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you.
Unidentified autonomous phenomenon.
Autonomous. All right.
And that's
I have heard it a couple times. Yeah, I have heard it a couple times, and I don't know. It almost sounds like a little,
Autonomous.
confusion method. Yeah, a little thing. Let's throw them off with this.
Yeah, and that's one nobody can really won't stay on the top of the tongue either. United aerial phenomenon. I mean, unidentified aerial phenomenon.
Unidentified.
Isn't yeah, and that's where I went. But now it's switched because there's been so many water sightings and so many recent developments from aircraft, big naval aircraft that are gigantic and things 5x their size underwater going under them. It's like what the hell is? There's no submarine 5x the size of a naval carrier.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
That's
Yeah.
been
No,
interesting.
there's definitely some crazy stuff out there. I mean, I wish we had it as much like I wish we had body cam vids for all those things. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and you got to think that's another thing you mentioned, just any cameras in particular, the way technology's evolved, we are getting more and more sightings, more and more, and a lot of this is still redacted and held back, and we all know that, but there's a lot more like the Tic Tac craft, the David Fravor,
Oh
Commander
yeah.
Fravor incident in the
Yeah.
2000s. I'm saying there's been a handful of really, really good ones where, unlike in the past, there was actually data to corroborate. So it was eyewitness site, it was data
Yeah.
backed, and it was all
Radar and all that.
corroborated properly. Which in the
Yep.
past, and from everything we've heard from lots of stories, they're able to distort radar and communication and our ability to track them pretty well. Like a lot of the sightings, there's no radar. Like guys, like I'm seeing this and talking back to radar command, they're like, it's not on radar. It's like, oh, it's here, man. But like, you know what I mean?
Yep. That might have a lot to do with advancements in radar too, because we used to look at a certain section of the sky with like say one wavelength from one satellite or from one radio transmitter. Now we're looking at the same airspace from 50 transmitters and 50 different wavelengths. So you get all these variations in there. You know what I mean? Like that could have a lot to do with just advancement of technology too.
Yeah, yeah, and let's get into that in a minute because the technology is certainly interesting, and it's why we as a country and government has been super interested in them. I think it's primarily the technology. I think that's
Well,
what
yeah.
fascinates them the most and has the biggest advancement, both us internationally as well as intergalactically, I guess you could say, because
Yeah.
those ramifications would apply. Um, Damn, I forgot where I was going to go with my next statement. I had something to talk about. Oh yeah. So as I talked about, like you and I have been on a different, YouTube episode that got posted. Also, something I did a couple years ago because I'm pretty fascinated with the topic. One of YouTube videos I released is called Project Evidence, and I put together hundreds of hours of watching documentaries, reading books, interviews, and I'm still fascinated. I put that together a couple years ago. So also link that in here because that goes through a lot of just like the explanation
Cool.
and the data where I got my sources, which a lot of people are always interested in. I'm not going to spend the time to go through that all again, but I will link it here in the description. But what
I'll have to give it a watch.
Yeah, I'll send it over to you directly as well. What I went through initially in that was I went through some, again, like some of the names we'll discuss, the Bob Lazars, the Stan Romanek, if you're familiar with his
Oh
story.
yeah.
Brad Meltzer's Decoded on Area 51 was a great source of information that really opened up some doors. They got into some back people and got to talk to people that most people can never get to because they have some resources and connections, which you or I kind of don't for those type of government agencies and people that have worked at Area 51. Um,
Yeah.
and so I documented like the research. Then I put together slides of say 10 world famous politicians across the globe, presidents, prime ministers, naval leaders, all saying their take or their experience with UFOs. And most of those cases probably stem 50s through 80s. Most of those
Yeah.
individuals and those people. When I think people were a bit more reputable, and we all know back then, anybody, especially in a high ranking position, coming out talking about it, were kind of ostracized. You know what I mean?
Of course.
A
Yeah.
lot of pilots specifically said, "Man, I would never tell my commander what I thought. They might think I had a psych evaluation to pull my license, right? Like, there's all
Yep.
these things." So,
Yep.
yeah, all that part's really fascinating too. And then some of the other names, right, that don't always get out there. Like you're probably familiar. I'm hoping you are. George Knapp. You know that name?
Oh, of course. Yeah, I've been listening since I was a kid.
Yeah, exactly. Me too. So
Yeah.
George Knapp and Bob Lazar kind of hit the scene together because George Knapp put him on his broadcast, and that was the first interview
Yep.
in '89, if I'm not mistaken. I believe it was '89. And now
Probably.
George, so you might not know, but George in the next 30 to 90 days is going to have this news thing coming out with some of the best evidence he's ever had, which he's unable to talk about right now until the
Nice.
final, what's it called? I's are dotted and T's are crossed, right? Till the details are
Yeah. Yeah.
done. But he
Yeah.
started talking generally about like what he's got and where he's been doing this research. And this is a 10-year effort before he even put together and thought about turning it into a film or a documentary. He's just like, man, it evolved and I got so much more than I was anticipating. There's no way I can't share it.
Nice.
So I'm excited because he's not one that just blows shit out of proportion,
Yeah, no, he's pretty down to earth, pretty much. Yeah. Him
And
and
then
Art Bell.
involved in there. Oh, go ahead.
Him and Art Bell.
Art Bell, yeah, I'm not as familiar, but I've heard his name referenced in a lot of this stuff.
He took over the radio show after the other one retired or quit or whatever.
Oh, that's how I'm hearing him
Coast to Coast Radio. Yeah, Coast to Coast Radio was the radio show they all started on.
Gotcha. And obviously, Bob Lazar has been a big part of this over time. So let's talk about him momentarily. But one other name that kind of came out, and he's building his own documentaries, and one was with Bob Lazar, I'm 99% sure. Jeremy Corbell, he's been on Joe Rogan a couple times too. Are you familiar with him?
Doesn't ring a bell, but I might know him.
He's kind of a little more out there in terms of his theories, in my opinion. He's definitely a believer, but he takes it to the extremes. But he has produced some of the films and put a lot of the resources. Yeah, definitely Bob Lazar, because he was the one reported on the most recent raid when they went to his house trying to find element 115, even though there's no traces of him even having it. So yeah, Jimmy Corbell is another guy that's producing a lot of stuff. Works with George Knapp on a couple of things, so you might hear his name in the future. But
I think it was only 6 or 8 years after he predicted it that it was found. You know what I'm saying? So
Lazar.
Yeah,
I think it was closer to
element 115. Huh?
I think it was closer to 15 or 20, but either way,
or whatever. Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So expound upon that. Yep. So for anybody watching, let's go into him, because I think for me he's the biggest character in all this, at least in my excitement and what got me into it, and probably my level of belief, because somebody in the inner workings that could kind of back it up. But if you're just giving people a basic, what do you think of Bob Lazar? Talk a little about him.
Well, I was always into geometry, and when I found his work, I was trying to look at it from the way that the technology that he was describing would like ride the geometry of space-time. So that was pretty interesting. And then I got into his generator. I started learning a little bit about the theory of his generator, the 115 antimatter generator, and that was pretty interesting. And the way the lensing system worked, and it was just it was like so far out there that it almost had to be true. You know what I mean? Like they had the I forgot the term for it, but there was a pipe that came down from the ceiling that held the top of the bowl over the reactor.
Yeah.
And it didn't have any moving parts. It just kind of like stretched like almost rubber, but was harder than steel. You know what I mean? And like the way the ship's design was, and some kind of metamaterials that were obviously not, common knowledge or produced by humans or whatever you want to call it. Some crazy new age metamaterials that were used. 15-inch thick hull was the ship he was on. It was only 15 centimeter thick. It was only this thick to go, from what he claims it came from Zeta Reticuli, which is whatever it is, 4 or 12 light years away. It's got to be.
Actually his guess. He's never said for certain.
Yeah. You're right. So I don't know, but I was kind of into it more on the geometry side of how it kind of rode space time, and then I realized, wow, it's not really kind of riding it. It's just making a wave in front and bend. Well, it is riding it, but not in the way I was thinking. Kind of bending and riding along a wave, which was pretty cool. And the way he described how they fly, interplanetary or interstellar flight as opposed to just hovering over the Earth. Like we always see them over the Earth flat, like their belly is pointing down. But anytime they would fly like intergalactic, the belly would be facing toward the planet they wanted to. And you know what I mean? Like all the different kind of figure eight configurations of the systems that he was talking about. There's only like a 4-piece system that was operating the propulsion systems, only like a 4-piece system. It was pretty, I don't know, it caught me right off guard. It caught me right off the bat. That's all I can say. And I was like, I think there's something to this. And of course, dug deeper for a few years and off and on, and kept catching the newest thing he'd put out. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And he's got all this other stuff he did, like just on the side. Like, he built a hydrogen car and a hydrogen Corvette in the 80s or 90s, powered by nothing but water, and just all these other little side projects he did, like, for fun.
Nope, 100%, 100%. That's great. That's kind of cool. I liked it that you looked at it from that side because I never really looked into much of his, mathematical and scientific and all those type of things. I never really looked in. I know he's a brilliant guy, and I know that's his background. That's the
Yeah,
first I really know about him outside of what people have dug into his past. Once he came, once he started to become popular, which that's a whole nother story. But the first I knew about him was article that got written in a small paper. I want to say it was back in Arizona in the day when he built that rocket car, basically.
yeah.
And then somehow that article is what led up to and a guy he met with that car, which is led up to his actually getting that interview to go work at. It wasn't actually Area 51. What did he call it? It was a subsection of it.
S4.
S4. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
So Bob Lazar, some people say allegedly, I believe this to be 100% fact, but allegedly worked at S4 in the late
Yeah.
80s. And he was tasked with one partner, the name of Barry, to try to reverse engineer the propulsion system for one specific craft. He says they had 9 different craft at said location. He said they were pretty much all, if not all, I think all 9, but at least a bunch of them, all different from different finds, different shapes, different designs, and even different workings.
Maybe from different civilizations.
Yep. And he really only got to inspect the craft that he was working on. I think only once or twice he actually got to go in it.
Well, he said he only went in once. Yeah.
Okay, it's only once. So that's what they were saying. Even that project, it was super compartmentalized. Like, we're only working on propulsion, and we can't even communicate with the guys working on this. Like, so it's so hard for, he said, for information to evolve because the scientific method is to share with the other brains and come up to a like-minded consensus, right? So long story short, but he said when he was in there, it was built for about the size of 3-foot beings. No rivets, no welds, 100% smooth. Not a particular metal that he could describe. Just all kinds of really. And then what you were talking about, when I saw years later when he actually drew a diagram of it, how the system worked, the propulsion, the reflector, or the that's the wrong word for it, but you know what I'm talking about.
No, there was gravitational
or rods, he would call them.
Yeah, there was gravitational reflectors, amplifiers, lenses, the actual reactor, which was basically just a plate with an upside down bowl on it, and the element 115 in there, which does make sense. It would constitute a magnetic bottle, which would facilitate antimatter, combustion in the field between the center and the shell, blah blah blah. So it all kind of made sense to me too, on that level too, on the physics level.
Yep. Yeah, and again, no doubt a brilliant guy with a highly advanced scientific and mathematical background and skill set. So then anyway, he only works for S4 for approximately a year, give or take. I don't remember the exact time. It wasn't too long before, for whatever reason, that never, you only hear Bob's side of the story with that, and there's always two sides to that story. Anyway, they parted ways, right? And his big thing when he first came out, his first interview was in 1985, I believe, on a local Las Vegas television station, which George Knapp was hosting or broadcasting the program or what have you. And Bob, in his first one, he went by an alias with his whole, thing shadowed out, right?
Yep.
He didn't even.
Yeah, he was scared.
I don't get it. Yeah, he was really scared.
Well, they did right after that. They did erase his entire history, his bank accounts, his
where he went to school.
What do you call it? His employment records, his educational, credential. His credentials were all damaged. They weren't gone, but they were all down from like Stanford to, community college level. They knocked him down and everything. They made him look, unbelievable. As much as possible. Yeah, as much as possible.
Yep. And then it made the people who were trying to go check his story like, oh, you didn't go to college here. He's like, yes, I did. Like, it's funny because I forget what school, but they even called up the school and they're like, no, Bob Lazar never went here. He's like, well, I'm looking at your student directory and it says right here, Bob Lazar. And, and they're like, oh, shit. Like, there was always little things that they couldn't fully erase. You're right. But
things in ink.
Did a good job. And
if it was in ink, it might still be around. If it was on a computer, they got it.
Yeah, totally. And he was right at the age where stuff was all starting to go to computer, late 80s, especially in the government, So, but he said his main reason for coming out were twofold. Number one, he already knew that they were going to be attacking him and discrediting him, and he kind of went out for his protection. And that's why his second one, he put a face to it, because like, if people know me and then I end up murdered, right? Like, they can make the attachment to the government. So most likely. But he really thought it was just the biggest crime against humanity to not tell people. And that's his number one thing. And that's what I always loved about Bob. You can
Yeah,
see this has
absolutely.
just ruined his life more than it's helped his life. He's not out there trying to make
Absolutely.
money off his story. He doesn't even like talking about like the whole alien aspect. He likes the math behind it, right? And the technology. He doesn't care
That's
about the
kind of what
actual
got me
beings.
into it too. Yeah, no, that's what got me into it too.
Yeah, it's just
But
he's really interesting and fascinating. And what you were saying, like, so back in the 80s, he said, they're like, well, how's this thing powered? It's powered by something called element 115, which fuels the propulsion system. We don't 100% know exactly the inner workings. At the time, guys, the periodic table didn't have 115 elements. That
right,
didn't come out. And I don't even think it's been renamed. I think it's just element 115, where if you go element one,
no,
it's
it's
got a name.
called
Element two,
Markovium.
okay, thank you. Thank you. I figured you might
Yep,
know. I tried to find it once and nothing was coming up, or I was getting weird answers.
yeah, they named it.
Okay, but either way, we didn't have element 115. Our periodic table hadn't been up to that many elements yet. And then sure enough, 10 or 15 years later, element 115. Sure enough, people say that this, if we can stabilize it, right? We've done tests where it destabilizes really quickly the molecules. If we could
Yeah,
stabilize it, it certainly could be the fuel source that he said. So that's number
yeah.
one. Who can predict elements on the chart coming years down the road? It's never happened before, has it?
Well, I mean, if you've done any studying on the periodic table, you'll know that it's really probably infinite. But on Earth here, it stopped naturally at uranium, which I think was 98. Uranium was the heaviest element, and from 98 up is all man-made, stabilized, artificial elements.
Okay.
From uranium up, it might not be 98, it might be 92, 96, but I
Yeah, I
think
get what
it's
you're saying,
98.
though.
Yeah.
But I was only talking about this planet. I wasn't talking about so. But either
Yeah,
way, I
so
don't.
I'm what I'm saying about by that is like the implication there is some other planet, element 98 might be like granite here. You know what I mean? You might be able to go chisel chunk off the rock and throw it in your motor and just go. You
Yeah,
know?
yeah, oh, totally, totally. And that's another thing people talk about. Like their civilization, wherever they're from, could have started with much more advanced elements, and maybe they don't even have the same elements. Like,
Well,
they might have never needed the steam engine and to go through whatever. You know what I mean? They could have just
no,
started with what they have.
absolutely. Yep, that's a good way to look at it right there. Yep.
And like people always say, like with technology, like right, we can get one of their craft, but we're still having a hard time piecing it together and reverse engineering it. We have been for decades and decades. And that's a great analogy that I've heard. Like you go drop a nuclear reactor back in the 1500s, they're not going to know what the hell
Yeah.
to do with it. They're going to go in and kill
No.
themselves. You know what I mean? Or
Yeah.
even a
Yep.
motorcycle. If you went and dropped one 100 years ago, people wouldn't necessarily know to turn the key and start it. They'd be fucking fascinated. They'd probably be taking
No, they'd use
everything
it for a
apart
wagon to move rocks or something.
if they can even start it. I honestly don't know if
No, I
somebody can
mean just
start this.
pushing it. I meant just pushing it.
Oh, okay, yeah, that would make sense. That
Yeah.
would make sense because, but that's my point. Like, if somebody started with something so much advanced beyond what our civilization can comprehend, it's hard to fathom what they can achieve. Number one, and then of course the
Yeah.
other scenario is they have similar elements and they've just been around hundreds, thousands of years longer, and their technology is better, right? That's also possible. I think the
Absolutely.
first one's actually more likely that they have different elements and they probably went through a different trajectory in their civilization than we did.
It only makes sense with every different star size, star density,
Mm.
planetary spaces from the planet, from the star, all kinds of factors means none of these things are identical. Nothing, no two planets are identical. I mean, we could probably go to Mars and find something a little different, even though it's only a hop, skip, and a jump away.
Yeah, no, that's another good point. And a lot of people, myself included, don't really think about it that way. That's totally a good
Yeah.
point. The other thing that Bob predicted that came true and they found 100% that people thought he was crazy at the time was he said to get in, it had this weird hand scanner to get into his security base back then in the 80s. And he tried to describe it. It wasn't made for 5 fingers. It was kind of weird. And he also said it was measuring your bone density. So it wasn't even your fingerprints. Every single person has different bone density in
Wow.
their fingers
I don't
here.
remember that.
And yeah, look it up. It's Joe Rogan did a
I
great
will.
thing. They
Yeah.
actually found it. And they showed it, and Bob's like, "That's the exact one I fucking described." Like he didn't even see the
Cool.
picture until Joe
Cool.
showed him. And then the way he
Yeah.
reacted,
Cool.
he's like, they said it wasn't tech, it wasn't even around. It wasn't. It's like now it's in all of like the fucking like Google buildings. Like they're using these same scanners
Yeah.
for it's
I
crazy.
bet.
But
Yeah.
and people thought he was nuts back then. So it wasn't even like fingerprint. It was bone density, which is actually harder than a fingerprint. You can't fake bone
Oh,
density.
I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure.
So yeah, so I mean those things just by themselves, nobody could just like look ahead and predict this. And his whole story, and then the way he was, his past was just ripped apart and trashed. I mean,
Yeah.
it's hard to find him not believable, especially for a guy that really fucking doesn't like the spotlight and to talk about
Yeah.
it. That's
Yeah.
why he was
Yeah.
always the most integral person in this journey for at least me getting all into it.
Have you looked into Stephen Greer's work?
Oh yeah, Dr. Stephen Greer,
Yeah,
the
I
what
like his
project he
concept.
does.
Yeah, CE5
He also
or
has
the
this thing called the
CE.
Something Project.
Yeah, he does. And geez, I'm drawing a blank right now too.
Might even be called the Disclosure
But
Project. Actually, it might even be
Disclosure
that.
Project. That was
Okay,
it. Yeah, yeah.
he's fascinating.
I really like the way he had no what do you call it? No hardware, no tools, no ships, no nothing. He just went out and meditated and fucking made contact by himself. And when I was living out there in California, his mountain was one mountain over from mine. So every now and then I'd hear some stuff going on across the valley, and those would be the nights I caught some crazy stuff on film. I don't know if you've seen my videos on
You sent me
YouTube.
a
They're
few.
under
No, you used to send me a few when you would get them.
yeah. So I'm just saying those. He was one mountain away from me, probably doing his meditation thing, calling him in while I'm filming him, going, what is this? You know what I mean?
I never knew he was one mountain away from you.
Yeah, maybe two. I mean, it might have been two humps
Whatever, I
away, but
get it.
he's
Yeah,
right down the valley, right across from Shasta.
yeah, Greer certainly, and he's been big into pushing this more through government and trying to get more disclosure
Oh,
and
absolutely, yeah. He's informing presidents. He's informing
dignitaries and
high ranking intelligence officials. He's informing like governments of other, the NATO and all them people. He's up there now. He's
yeah,
got
that's
a
a
foot
good
in the
one. I'm
door for
surprised I didn't even
sure.
think of that.
And he's probably the most likely to make a wide impact on just the whole disclosure movement. You know what I mean? Right now, in my opinion.
That's funny. I'm
And
looking back right here at my slide from the thing I did in my Project Evidence episode. Dr. Stephen M. Greer, Disclosure Project 2001 and Unacknowledged were the two
yeah,
projects that I
unacknowledged.
had seen of him when I did that particular thing. So yeah,
I
that's kind
think
of
he's kind of a little bit a step ahead of everybody because if you want to follow most of these people's stories, you got to know some physics, some math, some just a lot of intellectual stuff. And if you're following Stephen Greer stuff, you just got to kind of learn his method, his system, and sit outside and have and enjoy your night. You know what I mean?
yeah, no, that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Um, so what, just personally, what's your thoughts on, you know, I guess the whole conspiracy and what's happened within the government since Roswell-ish? What's your take? Did that happen? And just kind of expound from there and your thoughts personally.
Well, yeah, I think that was one of the first large steps we had in this technology run that we're on. You know what I mean? It was
Yeah.
maybe it kicked it off. If not, it was one of the first large steps in this technology run that we're still not near the end of. We haven't even satisfied the rules of quantum computing yet. And once that happens, there'll be another huge leap. You think Chat GPT's fun? Wait till you see this quantum GPT. It's gonna blow some minds, whatever they call it. I don't know what they're gonna call it. But yeah, I definitely think Area 51. I mean, the Roswell incident was probably one of the biggest and first leaps, at least for this country. And before that, I would say we were studying most of the bigger leaps came from you know, ancient scriptures, ancient ruins, temples. There was definitely clues there that gave us a
No,
lot
that's
of
a good point.
information that basically just said, yeah, we're not as advanced as these people were way back then. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yep. No, that's
Yeah.
interesting. I mean, I agree. I certainly think that one happened. I think that one may have some of the best and most compelling evidence. I've done some deep dives into a lot of stuff on, um,
We should take a break
where
for our
the,
sponsor, Benchmark.
there we go. Pause for station identification. And there's your pause right there. Yeah, I even dove into obviously there was the initial headline that came after, right? UFO, and then the next day it was all of a sudden a weather balloon. Totally
Yeah,
different,
yeah, yeah. Of course.
even the initial government statement was unidentified flying saucer. They used saucer at the time, not object.
Yeah. Yep.
But that was actually in the headline, which and next day it was all redacted. The first U.S. government official, Army guy, I forget his name at the time, was told
Yeah,
to
me
change
too.
his statement. He didn't see what he did. That rancher on the farm that first stumbled across it and called the government was then
Yep.
within a few years disappeared, and nobody ever heard from that guy again, miraculously.
And,
But
you heard the story about the ambulance driver and the mortuary guy, right?
no, I don't think. I mean, if so, refresh me. I'm not sure.
Well, I'm not going to quote it verbatim, but basically they called the local morgue because they needed a place to store these 3-foot bodies that they had, and so the morgue thought they were bringing in kids, but they didn't bring in kids. They brought in some crazy stuff, and then they had the morgue people, of course, told the story around town, and I think the ambulance driver and maybe one of the deputies in town, and they told stories at the bar that night or whatever at the diner, told their kids, and the next day they had to go try and cover up all the tracks that they cover up all the stories that they told the night before, and said, try and make people disbelieve what they told them the night before now.
Actually, I do remember some of that now. They thought it was children, the little bodies. I definitely do remember hearing something about that, probably in something I watched. Also, a majority of that wreckage was actually sent out of that area to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I believe it's in Pennsylvania, if I'm not mistaken. And still to this date, it's said to house quite a lot of materials from certain wrecks. We'll just leave it at that because I don't know how.
I think that's where what's it? Lockheed and the Skunk Works places started too.
That was
right around then. Right around, not I mean in Pennsylvania, I mean around that crash incident.
Yeah, that time period.
Yeah,
I agree. Ironic, right? And a lot of those names, the big names associated with those companies, have a lot to do with this whole UFO phenomenon as well.
Of course.
A couple that are slipping my mind right now, but I know one or two that big names in those Skunk Heed and Locks and other companies like that. I mean, they have a direct tie. It's
I mean, it's clear as day now, but I wondered for a while.
So again, this whole topic, like I'm trying to do in the series, what I think is coming more and more, and I think we're in agreement here, is there's more disclosure, there's more openness to talk about this, and there's just more and more reports. And like with anything, whether we're talking, my argument is always to anybody, but the amount of sightings, not just in the U.S., but internationally, you could talk UFOs, you could talk ghosts, right? Talk about if even one of them is real, they're real. Like only one sighting has to be real. Out of all the sightings ever of anything, if one sighting is real, that thing exists. If I go out to see a squirrel, squirrels exist. I don't need to see 100 of them. I only need to see one to know they exist.
Prove it.
But let me get some walnuts, and I'll get a squirrel up here in no time.
But I do know what you're saying. You're right.
I understand there's going to be phonies and there's going to be bullshit images, right? But like, it doesn't mean everyone is my point. But carry on.
Well, I'm just saying, you can look back as far as whatever, biblical and pre-biblical, and there's been talks of sightings and, drawings, whatever, paintings, stories written. And so, I mean, there really shouldn't be much doubt after several thousand years of repeated similar, observations.
And stories coming down from, like you said, different cultures, different places around the world. It goes back to Egyptian hieroglyphs with there's spaceships, there's
of course
holding of gods from the skies coming down with weird shaped heads. I mean, anybody could make that stuff up as well, right? But like you said, repetitive. No, but the repetitive and the time over history, I'm all about that. But there's a lot of people with anything. We could talk about, the resurrection of Christ. It had witnesses, had people that saw it and wrote about it and died for it. But there's still people that are like, show me some proof lately that there's God, right? So people are the same with aliens, right? Show me. But I think that's what's happening now in the world we live in, is there is a lot of proof lately, and a very lot of it. I think there was a recent, I'll look up the exact town. There's two real good ones in Brazil, crashes. One is a
by the
town
school,
called Virginia with a V, and they made a documentary called The Moment of Contact. It's phenomenal. There's a more recent one. I can't think of this city. It begins with a C-O. Can't think, and it's not Columbia. It's not a huge city. It's a smaller one. And actually, George Knapp, a lot of his documentaries from this particular crash instance. This second one I'm talking about in Brazil. So, I mean, not only in the U.S., right? And we somehow, our government wants to get involved whenever this happens in another country. We want to get involved in clearing the wreckage or being informed on what's going on. But I mean, there's lots of great worldwide sightings, but there's just a couple where there's so much evidence. And those couple things I just mentioned, the both of the things in Brazil, when I did my last demonstration or presentation on this 2 years ago. I had not known about either of these, and that documentary I just talked about, The Moment of Contact, I don't even think was made at the time. So and Joe Rogan loves that one too. He talks about it. I don't know if you've ever looked into it. Look into Virginia, Brazil, or The Moment of Contact. It's really good. That's where they actually handled Being, and the soldier that carried him to the hospital where they laid him down. Within a week, 25-year-old strapping young muscular guy, within a week had some weird infection. He was dead. They couldn't put their name on it. It was starting to deteriorate his skin. The hospital, every worker said the stench of this being they brought in, even after 3 weeks of bleach, disinfectant, it had this foul smell, like, almost like rotting flesh, but they couldn't equate the smell to anything that they've ever smelled on this planet. There was just some great evidence. The 3 girls that saw this thing crouched in the corner walking home from school 30 years ago, their stories to this day, nothing's changed, and the fear in their eyes when they still tell it. Like, again, people with nothing to gain, and they're probably getting ostracized in their community for like talking about it. You know what I mean? It was a really good one. You should check it out if you haven't.
I will. Similar one just happened in Africa not too long ago. I'll say 5 years ago, where where the disc landed outside of a school full of like 100 kids, and all the kids ran out in the yard and just watched the aliens get out of the craft, kind of almost wave at them and walk up toward them. They all had some little memory lapses and like some some missing time a little bit, and then afterwards, when some government officials were doing the investigation, they had all the kids in separate rooms, and they asked them to draw what they seen. And literally, I mean, I saw dozens and dozens of kids crayon drawings that were all the same. You know what I mean?
Yep.
They all saw the same thing, experienced the same thing, and then I forgot what the cover-up story was, but it was something like a mass hallucination and a weather balloon crash at the same time, or something like that. But I forgot the exact details of that.
I think it's much. I'm trying to look it up. I know the exact one you're talking about. The only reason I didn't make that initial assessment is I think it's much older. I think you just saw that 5 years ago, and I just did find it. It was 1994 when that happened.
All right. Yeah. Then yeah.
I know the exact same story. The kids were brought in. They were drawing the similar things. They had memories, like exactly what they looked like. They could explain it. It says in '94, over 60 students at Aerial Elementary in Ruwa, Zimbabwe, claimed to have seen UFO aliens in the bush near school. The event was covered by the global media, is considered to be one of the most significant encounters between humans and extraterrestrials in history. A documentary has since been made. Aerial Phenomena. It's called Aerial, the name of the school, Ariel, and then just the word phenomenon. The documentary. I didn't know that existed, but I did see. So I did see exactly what you're talking about. And again, I didn't make the initial correlation because I thought it was the 90s.
Yeah. All right. I got you. Yeah. I must have just ran into it a few years back or something. The story.
Probably when the documentary came out and they were dropping all kinds of little clips.
Yep. Could be.
But that Virginia one, again, a movie was just made about it recently. That was 96. So, and that just all kind of came out. That one I was talking about in Brazil, it was 96 when the incidents. And another thing they have is the guy who actually made the first sighting saw it hit the ground, drove his pickup truck over to the area, and then he was sworn to secrecy. And I believe he couldn't come out and say it, but I believe his family was threatened with like life and death. So he literally did not talk about it until this documentary was made. So 96 to 2021 approximately. Did not open his mouth about it once. It's always cool when you get the people that, that can finally or finally get the courage to open up because they were threatened. And I fully get it, man. I wouldn't want my daughter getting shot because I went and talked about something by the government. Like, I get it. It's hard to keep your mouth shut, but it's also hard to put your family at risk.
I can understand it too. Yeah. And he probably even got paid. He probably even got, whatever, some kind of perks too,
There probably was. I would agree with that.
Yeah.
So much money, or you get the land here, whatever.
Something. Yeah. Something.
That's the inner workings of government and behind the scenes. It doesn't really matter where you go.
Unfortunately, it's inner workings. I think that's unfortunately the inner workings of society now. Never mind government. You can pay anyone to shut up.
You're right. Fair enough.
Yeah.
That's pretty good. Yeah, I mean, that covered kind of a lot of what I wanted to talk about, some of the names, conversations. I thought that was pretty good. Anything else you want to bring up on the topic? Anything we didn't cover?
I mean, I didn't really put a lot of thought into this. I should have put some more, but I kind of thought you had a little layout what you wanted to do. But I don't think I have anything too pressing off the top of my head. Like I said, this hasn't been my area of interest in the last little while. It's been my later things have been more some geometry and kind of some meditation stuff. So
That's
I've
awesome.
been in that world for a little bit, you know?
Totally. No, I get it 100%. No, don't worry about that. I don't really structure prepare these too much. I do more so in the debate fashion. Like I know the
Yeah.
topics I'll hit. But I also want these to be really organic and free flowing. If they fucking boring,
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
I don't post it or nobody watches. Like no big deal. Who the fuck cares? Um,
Absolutely. I
but I
do.
kind of like
I
the
would.
organic conversation. The only thing I wrote down going into this was a handful of names I wanted to make sure to drop and bring up, at least talk about, and to emphasize that I the channel as well as this particular topic, the disclosure and transparency, I think is what's gonna bring people together on this. It really is.
It will. Yeah, it definitely will. I mean, there's no question. I still think there's going to be a big discrepancy about what gets released and what actually is, but that's a whole nother debate. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
they're gonna show us what what their water faucets do and what the spaceship does on a real fundamental level, but I don't think they're gonna show us the actual
I would
real
agree with
crazy.
that, unless they can't not show us because it landed on our
Yeah, yeah,
lawn,
yeah,
right? You know what I mean?
yeah. At least for a while. Yeah, at least till it props up, till it rears its ugly head.
I would agree with that. Let's do one last little quick topic before we end on this, because this is something
Sure,
that's super relevant.
sure.
Not sure how much you know about it. This would have been way before the last few years, but what's your knowledge and understanding of Project Blue Book?
Blue Book. Wait a minute. Am I thinking? I get all these paperclip Blue Book, all these projects confused. Which one was Blue Book? Was
So
that
this was kind of the first.
was that the remote viewing?
This was kind of the first internal um, team. This was really two guys. Dr. Alan Hynek. Does that name
Oh
ring a
yeah,
bell?
yeah, yeah. No, I do
And he
remember
worked with
what you're talking about.
a U.S.
They
Air
went
Force
around.
guy, Jesse Campbell, or something like. I might have his name messed up there.
They went around and interviewed everyone who saw UFOs, right, and tried to whatever smooth it over
Yes,
and debunk them. Or yeah.
100%.
Well, I mean, I think there's no doubt that it's a real thing and that it really happened. I don't. I It's been years since I read about it, and I was probably in Ludlow in my 20s when I read about it last time.
Oh, that makes sense.
But I definitely think it was real, and there was a lot to it because why else would they be sending a crew, an investigation team around nationwide and sometimes worldwide to debunk people if there was nothing to debunk? You know what I mean? It's
So
it's
true.
common sense. It's
Yeah.
common sense. And it's not like it was all even similar. Like some people saw whatever, a disc in the sky, and some people had 2 days of missing time and came back mutilated. Like they sent them to cover such a wide field of stuff that they had a wide field of stuff targeted for these people to try and cover up or debunk or make sense of, however you want to look at it. And I think they had a little backup team too that went and hushed the local newspapers, the local media, TV, whoever it was that was also talking about the story, and they went and you know all the Murdoch crews of the world got shushed up by them guys too.
Of course. Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. So the thing that I really, I followed that pretty I read it more recent, and they also came out with a two season TV series about it, and the specific, hey, episode 1 was about the first one that they ever investigated. Episode 2, so a series
Oh,
came out within the
what was
last
that
10 to
called?
15 years. Project Blue Book.
All right. I'll have to.
It's
See. I
excellent.
have trouble. I have trouble getting into things that are over a couple episodes long because I just never seem to finish them. You know what I mean? Like, so I tend to watch movies, stuff that's 2 or 3
I get it.
hours in one chunk. I tend to or do my. I'm not going to say watch stuff because sometimes it's just reading, but a few hours at a time.
I
Not
get it, but these are 1 hour an episode. And if you just want to watch one episode, just watch one. You'll see
yeah.
each one's
No,
a
I'll
different
have to look.
investigation, so it's like its own thing. But
I'll go.
regardless, the cool thing about it is the scientists that they got in. First off, total alien and UFO skeptic, did not believe in them whatsoever, and they brought him in to come in and make up these theories on how to convince people that they saw natural things. Right? He came up with swamp gas for one. Another one was the Northern Lights. Like, I mean, but he, after he left the project and no longer had his government ties in secret, came out and was a proponent for UFOs and aliens being real and started talking about these cases. So after his affiliation with Blue Book, and once, from what I understand from other sources, it was never totally scrapped. It was just officially scrapped, but there was still shit going on, right? It just wasn't the same guys and the same name.
Right.
But
What are the
with those
chances
two
of
guys
that?
in particular, and that Dr. Alan Hynek, again, if I'm pronouncing that or saying that right, I'm pretty sure that's accurate, was a really good proponent because he was so against it. And his family now talks about it like, my dad was a total scientist, like not into UFOs and aliens, always tried to explain stuff. And then they had him go explain stuff that nobody in the world could come up with an explanation. He had to give some bullshit. And he told us
Yeah.
all the stuff 10, 15, 20 years after the fact, right? He stood by
Yeah.
his word while he worked and towed the line, right? But like he was doing fake science to cover real craft.
That's absolutely right. I'm 100%. I believe that 100%.
That's what was cool about it. Awesome, man. Great conversation. Nice catching up.
Absolutely.
And yeah, this was an excellent episode, even though we didn't really debate. It's a discussion. And even though I had no fucking structure, because that's how I roll.
All right. Well, I'm game. Let me know when you really want to argue. Find something that I don't like and you like, or I like and you don't like.
Oh, we'll get to it sooner or later. There's always one.
Yeah. Yeah.
One thing I
All
like
right,
and
man.
you like that starts tonight in about 80 miles away from me. It's a
Yes.
5-letter band.
I do know it of it. I've heard of it once or twice. Yes.
I'll probably end up at one of the 3 shows this weekend at happenstance, but I got stuff going on with my daughter and other stuff already planned. But
Yeah.
I'll probably end up out. Yeah, there are 3 nights in Albany right now, kicking off tonight.
Yep. Cool.
Awesome, man. I'll hit you up soon. I gotta run here.
All right. Have a good one. And your mom.
No, your mom. Hey guys, check the description for my other video with Kenny here, or for my other UFO project evidence. It'll be down there in the description. Leave us some comments about your thoughts. Hopefully you learned something. Tell me
Please
you're gonna
do.
go check out, or tell me a UFO story that we didn't cover.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Take it easy.